getting an NBA team because we've heard expansion for a while now, and now it might come to fruition. So let me start here. So Brian Windhorst had some inside information that, I'm not gonna lie, was really awesome. I mean, not gonna lie, he always has really awesome information. I like listening to Brian Windhorst because he always gives you information and stuff that you may not know, and also tries to, I don't know if make a puzzle out of it is the right word, but like, he knows that he can't obviously say certain things when like certain trades are going on and whatever, but like he gives you little like tidbits for you to kind of like put the pieces together. So I enjoy listening to Brian Windhorst because, you know, he gives you info without necessarily saying too much, you know, because he obviously doesn't want to hurt his credibility, you know, with people around the league and his trust. So I respect that. So anyway, so let me start off with what Brian Windhorst said today on First Take, because I thought it was very interesting, and I feel like it may be the start of expansion teams. So they were talking about the Lakers selling for $10 billion and the impact that it's having around the league and stuff like that. And one of the things that I said when I was talking about the Lakers, selling for $10 billion is that although they are still capped, salary-wise, like everybody else, a second apron and stuff like that, the thing that I said would be different now is the fact that they don't have the necessarily financial limitations that they had prior. So like a lot of the owners in the NBA now are like billionaires, and compared to, and again, I'm not trying to count her pockets or anything like that. Like, that is not what I'm trying to do. But compared to some of the other owners who had basically like an endless money supply, it wasn't necessarily the same for the Lakers, compared to, Matt Ishbia, who just bought the Suns for $4 billion, right? So I say all that to say, selling for $10 billion, they're obviously selling to someone who has the, financial capabilities. Again, I'm not trying to talk down the Lakers. I'm trying my best to word it properly. But basically, they're going to have access to financial things they might not have had before. So what does that mean? So while it won't affect the roster, how much they could spend on the roster, it's going to give them the ability to build like a state-of-the-art training facility, or, do stuff outside of basketball to recruit people, hire the best talent, pay top dollar for the best scouts, and, all these kind of things. So not necessarily roster moves, but things that get people to want to come to the Lakers. And that may be training wise, that may be like the lifestyle wise, like all those kind of things. So they're going to have the financial flexibility to do that now. That's what I basically was saying. So getting back to Brian Windhorst. So they were talking about the Lakers, selling for $10 billion and all that stuff. And what he said was very interesting. And what he said was that the league was talking about expansion for a while now. And the Lakers selling for this price kind of confirms for Seattle and Las Vegas, as the two talked about teams, that expansion is probably coming soon. And I'm paraphrasing what he said here and, just off the top of my head. So basically what he said is that when you expand, you dilute. So the owners basically own about 3% of the league. Again, this is all according to Brian. Own about 3% of the league because there are 30 NBA teams. So when you expand, you dilute, all that kind of stuff. And if the value is not there, you don't necessarily want to take away money that you're bringing in because it may not exceed the expansion fees and stuff like that, which he said, I believe, could be like $6 billion per team. So that'd be $12 billion. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what he said. So they don't want to take away some of their money if it's not going to, cover the cost of expansion fees and, all this kind of stuff. So with that being said, seeing the value of these NBA teams makes it more likely that they can expand because the prices are there. But something else that he said that's very interesting is that if you don't know, this part I knew, but when teams or, when you make a dollar, whatever it is, whatever NBA teams do. They split the revenue, I believe 50-50 with the players. But what Brian said that was very interesting is that with expansion teams, they don't split the revenue. So the owners get to keep all the profits. So when I heard that, I'm like, put my thinking cap on. Interesting. Somebody said Lakers revenues were crazy though. Are you saying they were crazy good or crazy bad? Because they're obviously the Lakers, so they're always going to, have an appeal just being the Lakers. But it had gotten to the point where like all these owners, are like billionaires now. So like just being the Lakers only goes so far. Like at this point in the NBA, you have to have, because all these teams, like I said, have these billionaire owners who are creating, state-of-the-art facilities and all these other things. So like everyone is trying to be creative, especially when they're in the smaller markets, and they're figuring out ways to make their, franchise and team attractive to potential free agents. So, or, whoever. So with that being said, now the Lakers have more financial flexibility in that sense. So back to what Brian said. So he said that, and I was like, interesting. So why that's interesting is that I made a video a couple of years ago talking about potential expansion teams, and I listed 3 or 4 teams that I'm like could be a possibility based on like population and, stuff like that. And so obviously I believe I had Las Vegas and Seattle in there. I had 2 other teams in there. I can't remember who I put. But what is interesting is that if we expand, we the NBA, including me, as if I'm part of it, but if the NBA expands to Seattle and Las Vegas, that is adding 2 Western Conference teams. Now, you obviously can't have an extra team in the West and, have the imbalance in the East. So what do? Well, then you have to move a team from the West to the East. So my pick for that is the Memphis Grizzlies. The Memphis Grizzlies, I feel like, should be in the East anyway. Like, I don't understand why they're in the Western Conference, because unless I don't know geographically properly, someone else maybe can correct me on this, but I'm pretty sure that the Memphis Grizzlies are closer to the Eastern Conference teams than the Western Conference teams. So I don't understand why Memphis is in the West anyway. Now, maybe it's because they were the Vancouver Grizzlies. Yeah, they moved from Vancouver to Memphis, right? Because there was the Vancouver Grizzlies. Making sure that didn't turn into the Toronto Raptors, right? Whatever way it is, right? They're in Memphis now, so that part actually is not very relevant. But they're pretty sure geographically in the East, or more so in the East and closer to the Eastern Conference teams. So I don't even understand why they're in the Western Conference to begin with. So if you're going to expand to 2 Western Conference teams, you're going to have to move a team to the East. And if you're not willing to move the Memphis Grizzlies, which team is going to get moved? That is the interesting part to me, because again, you can't have an imbalance in the West of teams. So somebody has to move. And if it's not going to be Memphis, who is it going to be? It's not going to be any of the California teams, I'll tell you that. They're not moving, that's for sure. And I don't think any of the Texas teams are going to move either. So again, I think it would be Memphis. It just makes the most sense, because like they don't even have to move locations. You know what I'm saying? Like, because in an alternate scenario, if you don't want to move Memphis to the East, if you pick the Portland Trailblazers, for example, they have to actually move states. Like that, like they can't be an Eastern Conference team in Portland. You know what I'm saying? So like, it's going to be interesting to see if they do expand, who they pick to move to the East. Again, I think Memphis is the easy answer, but if not, is there going to be an NBA team that we have known for so long as, again, the Portland Trailblazers, not trying to single them out, but like the Portland Trailblazers, the Minnesota Timberwolves, like, are we going to see one of those teams become the Nashville? That's still in Tennessee, so that doesn't even make sense. But you know what I'm saying? Like, are we going to see one of those teams have to move to another conference? I don't know. That's interesting. Someone said, yeah, that's exactly why Vancouver was in the West. That's kind of what I was like trying to say and what I put together in my head, but I was like, I don't know, it just didn't process properly what I was saying out loud. But that was basically my thought process. I was like, if they were in Vancouver, then they were in the West, so they just kept them there. But that still doesn't like it makes sense. I obviously we are on the same page here, but like they still moved to a new location. Like I don't understand why they had to go to the West, unless at that time I don't know what all the teams were where. You know what I'm saying? Like most of the teams, like the Boston Celtics were still where they were, the Knicks were where they were, and stuff like that. But like there were other teams that were in different locations or whatever at that point. So like a lot of the teams were still in the same spot, but a couple of them weren't. So I'm not going to give you a map of what the NBA was when they moved. So maybe they had to move to the West to make it even for the East and the West. I don't know. That I don't. I don't know off the top of my head. Someone said the Pelicans moved from Charlotte too. Yeah, so I'm saying like a few teams have moved in recent years. I'm just saying I guess that at the time when they moved, that if they moved to the East, it wouldn't have been balanced. Like the West would have been with one less team, I guess. And obviously they were not expanding whenever they moved Memphis. Like they weren't adding another team or whatever. Again, I'm not trying to get all the timeline here or whatever. I'm just saying. So I guess that's the reason. But regardless, I think Memphis is the odd team out. I think they have to be the ones to move, because I don't understand why you would move another team when you can just literally put them in the East and they don't have to move at all. Like you don't have to lose a fan base. So that's my opinion on that. I just thought it was a very interesting, topic and conversation, that Brian Windhorst had today on First Take. And thank you guys so much for joining this live stream. I hope you enjoyed, and see you soon.